Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Bible study. It's good to be here today as we continue to walk through the Bible. I'm going to say up front, this chapter where we're at, I struggle with it and bringing the interpretation. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions, but you'll notice the background behind me is a little bit different. The room that we do this live stream in is being painted, and so we're all close and personal at the conference table. And so usually we have different tables set up and people kind of spread out, but not this morning. This morning we're close and personal. So when people comment, you should be able to hear them better. But welcome. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to probably do a lot of this out of the Amplified again. We'll start off in the King James. Oops, I'm in Deuteronomy there, based on a prior conversation. Let me go back over here to 1 Corinthians. And we stopped off last week at 1 Corinthians 11:2, but we're just going to go ahead and start at verse 1, kind of get the whole context of the chapter in here. And so we start off in verse 1, be followers of me. Paul's writing this, so he's saying, be followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. So he says, follow me as I follow Christ. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things, and keep the ordinances as I delivered them to you. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ. Now, when he says, let me go over here to the, it starts off with but also. See, I've said before, what side of the butt do you live on? Because what's on the right-hand side of the butt is really the crux of the matter. What's on the left-hand side of the butt is a lead up. So let's read verse 2, which is the left side of the butt. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things, and you keep the ordinances as I delivered to you. Amplified says, I appreciate and commend you because you always remember me in everything and keep firm possession of the traditions, the substance of my instructions, just as I have verbally passed them on to you. Okay, so hang on a second here. Okay, so then he says, but. So he just complimented them on what they're doing, but. So don't you love it when somebody's talking, man, you're doing such a great job. I just really appreciate everything you're doing, but now you know it's coming. Mm-hmm. So he shifts gears here, but I would have you to know, I need to add something else to this, what you're doing right, but I want you to know and realize that Christ is the head of every man. The head of a woman is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. So when he's commending them in verse 2, now remember what I said up front on this thing. Good morning, Aline. I don't think I welcomed everybody. Good morning, everybody that's with us. Thank you for joining us on this and being a part of our Bible study today. Whether you're here online right now or you come later, we appreciate you being here. So then after he comments or commends them on what they're doing, then he comes back and says, but, and this kind of seems like an abstract statement. I would have you know, Amplified, I want you to know and realize that Christ is the head of every man. Okay. The head of a woman is her husband. Okay. And the head of Christ is God. Okay. Now he goes into verse 4. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head. Let me go back to verse Amplified, verse 4. And a man who prays or prophesies, parentheses, teaches, refutes, reproves, admonishes, and comforts, with his head covered, dishonors his head, Christ. So now, Sergey and I was talking about this yesterday because I look at the Bible from a spiritual standpoint. He says, no, he's just talking about the culture there. You know, kind of like in America, It used to be if you walk into a building, especially a church, you take your hat off. Now people don't care. They'll sit through. In fact, I was streaming. I wanted to see something that the church was doing. And I was streaming. And it actually caught my attention because the camera was back here, and so you had like the front half of the church, and then you had the stage, and it just shocked me how many men had hats on, like ball caps. And me, 62, old timer, thought, wow, how disrespectful. Now, culturally, nobody really thinks about that anymore. That we can do now. It's always been like, I think, culturally acceptable that a woman, she could wear a hat as part of her attire. Nobody thought twice about it, but a man wearing a hat, take your hat off. So when we come to this, is he talking about, let me go back to the Amplified. When any man who prays or prophesies, teaches, refutes, reproves, admonishes, and comforts, with his head covered, dishonors his head. So is this just a cultural statement going back in the day that, and we've seen like what they call holiness churches, where like a woman will put like something over her head, or they might have it on their shoulders, but when they pray, they put it up over their head, or they may just have it over their head, like a scarf or something like that. I think a lot of the Muslim elements, the women typically have their head covers, and even in India, I don't know if it's I don't know if Suresh is on here, but a lot of the women's outfits covers their head. If you're on here, Suresh, because he's a minister over in India, is that from a biblical teaching, or is that from Hinduism, or where did they get that? If you're here, or any one of the Indians that jump on here.
Isn't it part of the culture in the Middle East that women would cover their hair, and some of them would even cover it down where only their eyes were exposed?
Right, which typically the Muslims.
It was to cover the lust component of men looking upon them.
Yeah, but he's not talking about lust here.
No, I was just answering the question about.
Yeah, and he says if a man, so like,
I think to be honest with you, it's spiritual. And I think he's talking about in verse 1, be ye followers of me. Now he's clarifying, let me explain something. I'm not talking about following Peter or Paul. I'm talking about the ordinance in which God has established things. That's what I believe he's referring to.
Okay, but it looks like there is cultural elements in there. Like if a man came in, I don't know if they wore hats, if they had men's hats back in the day. Maybe if they're out on the farm or something. I mean, it was hot and sunny. It seems like they would cover their heads somehow.
Turban.
But yeah, maybe a turban or something like that. But it sounds like if I stand up there and I preach with a hat on, I dishonor God.
Yeah.
I dishonor my head. Capital H, Christ, who's my head.
Right.
But now we come into, say, like the holiness churches that I brought up, that the women, they'll pull something up over their head. I was in Romania, and I think it was called the Pentecostal Union, but all, the men sat on one side, the women sat on the other side. All the women had a head covering on. Our team was told, when you come in, the women need to put something over their head, and they can't wear makeup. Okay. That's really, I can't really say it was cultural, because the rest of the world in Romania didn't do that. Maybe we were in Moldova when we did this. And so like, if we bring it in like culturally right now, I don't see it as disrespectful if a woman doesn't wear a head covering when she prays, when she worships, when she, anything. So then I bring back on me, that's a cultural stance, not a spiritual stance.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it was spiritually applicable that a woman, or let's take a man these days, because a lot of people wear the ball cap type hats. So if a Christian man was out, like, let's just say working his farm, and he just started praying but didn't remove his cap, he's dishonoring God. But culturally now, that's not a dishonorable thing. So when we go through this, let's go to verse 5, pick on the women here. But every woman that prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. Or, now this is a lowercase H in the King James. So remember up there in verse 3, it said the head of the woman is the man. So whereas in verse 4, every man that prays dishonors his head, that's a reference to Christ because Christ is his head. But, we had prayer down here yesterday, and my wife, Tammy, she led the prayer and she didn't have her head covered. I didn't find that dishonoring to me. But that's also, I have to realize that's also a cultural statement
Yeah.
that our culture doesn't find that dishonoring. Question: if a man came to a woman's fellowship because he had, I'm not.
Yeah, thank you.
Peter, talk to your wife.
Yeah.
No,
It's the coffee.
it's the coffee or lack thereof. Okay. Okay, you messed me up, sunflower. Okay, with her head covereth, dishonoreth her head, for that is even all one as if she were shaven. Now, any woman who publicly prophesies, prays or prophesies, teaches, refutes, reproves, admonishes, or comforts when she is bareheaded, dishonoreth her head, her husband. It is the same as if her head were shaven. Now, back in the day, a shaved head on a woman was a very dishonoring thing. But Sunflower Power on here, if you don't know her, if you're streaming with us on here, she's African American. And here a few years back, she shaved her head. It's been quite a few years, hasn't it,
Yeah.
Latrice? I remember, I thought she rocked it well. And I didn't have a hard time realizing she was a woman. Now, if a white woman would have done that, I probably would have said something because I don't think white women can rock it, the same way. But now, did I, when she walked in with that hairstyle, did I look at her as dishonoring? I didn't. I just, But again, isn't that a cultural element that it's a hairstyle? In fact, actually, I said that white women can't do it, but remember when Sigourney Weaver shaved her head for that movie?
Sinead O'Connor. Sinead O'Connor.
I don't know who that is, but I remember when Sigourney Weaver did it, and I thought, okay, she's okay. I mean, she's rocking it okay. She looks fine. But now here Paul's saying that it's yes, of course I remember that, and but here he says we're saved. So now we come back spiritual versus cultural. Is he talking about in our approach to God? Now, you had some cultural differences of back in the day than it is now. Culture changes. Things that are taboo become okay. Now, some things are obviously not of God. You take swimwear. You go back 30s and 40s, and what women wear? Well, they had these like, what's that? A full body swimsuit. I mean, like really nothing was showing. Now you go down to the beach and they got a thong on, and basically everything's showing. Well, okay, it's culturally okay, but the woman dishonors herself, and society dishonors. So we see where culture has changed, in that. Verse 6 says, "For if the woman be not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered." Now, that's interesting. Let me read it out Amplified. "For if a woman will not wear a head covering, then she should cut off her hair too. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to have her head shaved or shaven, let her cover her head." So again, it seems like there's a lot of cultural elements to it. Because in fact, when I was talking to Sergey about it, he says, you might have been in, and he's very good at history and the world at large. And so he mentioned some places. He says you might have been in one place in like the Middle East or something like that. And you go 100 miles over here, and it could have been a different, culture or environment. I know it would be true in Africa, having been to Africa, that there's like in Kenya, where I've spent most of my time in Africa, there's like 44 different tribes. And when you go into each tribe, they're different in their tribal culture. So you might be over here and, say like with the Maasai, and the women could be walking around with no tops, and you come over here to another tribe and they're fully clothed culturally, and nobody thinks, twice about it, because culturally it is acceptable. So how much of this becomes cultural, and how much of it does it just start dealing with when you're, because Paul's talking about proper worship in here. So could proper worship be different here than like in the United States, in the Western world, versus proper worship in Iran, among the Christians in Iran? Because our culture is different.
Yeah, they mixed their culture with their worship.
Yeah, because there's really no way, as much as I'm opposed to culture, I'm an American and I'm culturalized by America. I say we should all learn the culture of heaven. What is presentable in heaven? Well, I think God loves peoples. Like, well, I said that with an S on purpose. I wasn't talking about multiple people, but I was referring to people groups. I think as God looks over the earth and sees the variety of, just take dress codes. I love, there's elements of tribal dress codes, like I don't know what they call it, but you know how the Indian woman, what she wears, that it's called something, almost looks like a pajama or something like that, but it like, it has like pants and a top that wraps around them and stuff like that. Especially the ones like in China, the native dress things. I actually find them very attractive. Now, in the United States, people don't wear that unless they're from another country and they're living here and they haven't adapted to our ways. I remember there was a gas station I went to, and the lady there was, I believe, she's either Indian or Pakistani. I can't remember which, but she owned the place and she wore that. Then 9/11 happened, and I went in and got some gas, and she was in jeans and a t-shirt, because she didn't want to be identified with, the Muslims and stuff like that. And she wasn't Muslim, and her dress was not Muslim. It's just Americans are so ignorant. We lump everybody into one thing. But the Western dress code is different than the Eastern dress code or the African dress code, or well, a lot of Africa dresses Western, but if you get into their native dress, it's different. So now when talking about proper worship, thank you, Latrice, for the explanation. What is proper? Could proper in the Western world be different than proper in the Eastern world? And I think because in the New Testament, true worship is in spirit and in truth. All things come out of the heart. And so now, if we do things dishonorably, maybe within our culture even, are we not dishonorable to God? Or the one thing, my pet peeve that I always pick on is people walking late into church. That's dishonorable. We would never walk into the boss's office late. If the boss called us and said, I want you in my office at, whatever time, we will be there on time, because we've got a paycheck, so we honor the system. Some people are just so dishonorable that they would even forsake that. But we have protocols with parents. Now we're losing a lot of that we treated the elderly a certain way, because we honored their age and stuff like that. Now, especially here in the Western culture, we just we do what's convenient with them, and many people look at the elderly more as an inconvenience than being honorable to the elderly. And Yeah, I think it's beautiful too and colorful.
That's what I was going to say also too with that. Paul, to me, in understanding or attempting to understand this, he's trying to establish, I'm going to say the bylaws or the by effects on how we ought to behave as to the things pertaining to God. Even in this time, that's what I understand him to be doing.
Yeah, in fact, I remember you telling the story one time of a larger church that you were in, and you said a lot of the especially the women came to church like they were getting ready to go to the beach
Or club,
or a club.
yeah.
Now that would be dishonorable to God, I would think.
And why it
And
would be for me is that knowing that the eyes or the window into things, looking at some of the women's tight clothes, low cleavage, and all this other stuff, it will cause a man to veer off
yeah,
of what he come to church for. That would cause him to veer off, which is one of the reasons that I'm glad we're not there no more.
yeah, and I even go into the a lot of churches have this what they call I think they call it interpretive dance.
Yeah.
But like during worship, they will do these dance and have these
Flags
people,
and yeah.
stuff like that. Um, to me, that is distracting. I mean, I've been in churches before they have done that. Worship is going on, and then you sit there and you watch the dance, basically an entertainment
Yeah.
type thing. And really, our hearts and minds should be on God. And so, is it proper? Now, I know of people that I have a lot of respect that do this, and it's like rock on, do your church the way you want to do it. To me, it's a distractive type thing, and it's really Old Testament worship, because New Testament worship is in spirit and in truth. Where Old Testament, remember, David danced before God. I've seen also where, like I said, the clothing that they wore could be misinterpreted,
Mhm.
and so if a woman will not wear verse 7, for a man ought not to wear anything on his head in church. I'm reading out the Amplified. For he is the image and reflected glory of God. His function of government reflects the majesty of the divine rule, but woman is the expression of man's glory, majesty, preeminence. And there's a reference here back to Genesis 1:26. For a man, verse King James out of verse 7, or verse 7 out of King James, for a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is in the image and the glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. So now it appears that his instruction for a man is more on a spiritual thing than a cultural thing. That men don't cover your head because you're disgracing your covering. Verse 8, Amplified. For man was not created from woman, but woman from man. Verse 9. For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the angels. Let me read it out of the Amplified. Neither was man created on account of or for the benefit of woman, but woman on the account of and for the benefit of the man. Okay, so now let's come back to culturally, kind of like Sunflower's question there that I kind of skipped over about identification, which is not biblical. Anyway, if you're identifying contrary to what the word declares that we are, but now we come into how does the United States, that has really pressed the women's liberation movement, violate, because culturally it's acceptable. Now we have a cultural element that we try to endorse and promote equality between men and women, and yet the biblically the woman was created for the benefit and for the account of the man, which we have. You go back 50 years, we could say on a cultural basis it was not equal. But actually, the woman was more honored than they are now. A stay-at-home mom was a position of respect. Now it's, can the mom be a corporate executive? You know, am I getting paid the same as a man? Now we have, and I don't know why women want to do this, but we have women in law enforcement. Now, are they not smart enough? No, they're smart enough. They know law and things like that. But you know, I've seen women law enforcement officers that were like 5'3" or 5'4"
85 pounds.
and 85 pounds. Yeah. And that's with their gear on, you know. And then they pull somebody over like Peter that's 6'3" and 250 pounds or something like that. She's no match. I mean, if he goes crazy on it. In fact, I saw a thing where it was a video camera of a police officer. She was probably, she couldn't have been over 5'5", 5'6", something like that. You know, kind of an average size woman. And the guy was probably my height or a little bit higher. And he took one swing. She was knocked out before she hit the ground. You could see she, boom, she was knocked out and just slammed against the ground. No hand reactions or anything. I mean, he just, and then the back end of the story, he not only broke her jaw, but front, whatever this muscle is, right, or not, this bone right here is, cheekbone. I mean, and she had to have facial reconstructive surgery and everything like that. You know, does that mean that women, no women can maintain themselves? No, there's women that can handle themselves. There was a story of law enforcement officer in Los Angeles not too long ago, and somebody went crazy berserk on her and took off, like trying to close the gap. I think he was like 20 feet away or something like that, but she killed him. I mean, she drew her gun, zeroed in. Well, she was a competition shooter. She was well equipped for it. So I'm not saying that they can't do it, but it's, why do you want to? Especially if you're short. Especially if you, you know, if you're a 3rd degree black belt and a competition shooter, okay, you've set yourself apart, you know, then but if you don't have, you know, I do range work out at Rankin Field. I'm a range safety officer, and so I'm out there, and we get law enforcement come out, and we had there's a special range that they shoot on, which is away from the general public because they're drawing from their holster and doing things that the general public can't do. But for there was a competition going on and their range was totally used. So I had to block off the last bay. We set them aside and they went down. And so I'd come around and watch them. Yeah, they didn't know what they were doing. They're dangerous. And even the instructor that was instructing them, it's like, okay, stay down there because you guys are dangerous. And the ladies, and I'm not being negative here because it falls into the same category of a man, and I would say the same thing about a man law enforcement. They were well overweight. Okay. So they're not going to move easy. Just as a man, if he was overweight being law enforcement, you're not going to chase somebody down and you're going to get breath. What's it called? You're going to get winded because you don't have the stamina because the weight you're carrying. And I mean, why do we want to do things? So that now we come back to the worship of God. Why are we okay just doing us before a holy God?
Because of culture.
Well, culture says it's okay. So I started off on that dissertation on culturally, women's equivalency is a thing. Biblically, the woman was made to honor the man. I was listening to a pastor. I thought it was very interesting. It's Pastor Krause. And he was very much believed in the God's ability to provide all of our needs. And he had several people in his church because, you know, culturally and the way that our system is set up, we need 2 incomes. So the man and the woman works to make life work. But he really preached a lot about the woman's places in the home, to manage the home, to maintain the home, so on and so forth. And he had several people in his church, a couple, you know, a handful of them, not like, I mean, it was a church of probably 400 or 500 people, something like that. But he had a handful of people that we want to live this way, but financially we can't. And so he challenged them to step out in the word of God and believe that God would make a way for them. And he had several tests. I don't know if it was 100%, but he had several testimonies that the woman quit her job and became a housewife and maintained the house, raised the children, did what biblically is talked about. And something happened within the man that all of a sudden he made more money and their money worked. Well, that's alignment with God. Now, we could shift gears right now and go into faith. How much faith would that take? I mean, that's like, you know, if she's making $30,000 a year and he's making $40,000 a year, oh, that was an inequality statement, wasn't it? Okay, let's say they're both making $30,000 a year. You just cut your income in half and went from 60 to 30. And right now, making $60,000 a year, you're going to struggle. I mean, it's not like you're going to be doing a bunch of stuff that and especially if you're an average American, have a bunch of debt that you've become somebody else's investment, and they're making money off of you through the payments that you're making to them. Verse 10, therefore she should be subject to his authority and should have a covering on her head as a token, a symbol, amplified, of her submission to authority, that she may show reverence. I think that's a key statement right there. Now, the reverence, she may show reverence just as he wished and saw fit, and with the best adaptation. So I think that statement right there, showing reverence. Do we show reverence? Well, not now. I mean, you have people sitting in church on their phones, swiping through social media and stuff like that. And there's no reverence there for God or the preacher. I saw a case just the other day where a woman belittled her husband in public, and said some things like, wow, there's no honor there. And so we see these things, and the cultural mindset of doing what we want to do. I'm my own person. I have a right to choose what I'm going to do, supersedes what God has established, and it bleeds into the reverence of the things for God. Were you going to say something? Let's see. I got a statement here. I believe that there are a lot of discontent women due to this cultural normal. I 100% agree with that, because you can't take the woman out of the place of what she was created for and think she's going to be satisfied. And in fact, I remember a message that Pastor Harbaum was preaching, and he took deer. In Ohio where he lives, there's a lot of deer. Every year, deer and cars mix. Okay. And where a deer will typically stay within its habitat during rutting season, it will violate its own instincts to go into a place, and it will run across a freeway, get hit by a vehicle or whatnot, get killed, because it did not stay in the habitat that it was created for. And so, no, 100%. I was not trained to be a housewife. And culturally, because that's culturally the way that we do it. But I became a wife and have to unlearn so much doctrine. Yeah. In fact, we were talking about just the other day, and Tammy was making mention, referring to Titus 2, is that women are supposed to train the younger ladies how to be women. We don't have that. In fact, how many women today can cook? It's not very high. And in fact, I was talking to Crystal Rayo, who just got married, became Crystal Rayo, Crystal Alcala. And she just got married in February. So we were talking, and, she's like a daughter to me. And so, I've known her for years, ever since she was a little girl. I said, so Crystal, let me ask you a question. Do you know how to cook? She goes, I'm learning. And Juan's actually, I think, the better cook of the two. And so he's like teaching her. They're doing things together, making the meals. But there's a lot of women today that don't know how to cook. Yeah. They don't know how to sew. They don't know how to do a lot. Like you said, that I was not trained to be a housewife, and it's a real. And now this is culturally acceptable. I don't know that men, I'm 62, so my viewpoint's different, but you get down into the, say, the 20-year-olds, I don't know how many men looking to get married actually even expect their wife to know how to cook anymore.
My kids don't.
Yeah. And so what's happened? It's a cultural shift. And so you're, oh, that's a good statement, Latrice. That's interesting. I wonder how many other women would say this. Your heart says stay home, but your mind says get up and go to work. Now, it's interesting because Sunflower Power likes to post everything that she does in life.
Yeah.
But
Came across
when
online.
she's at home with her grandkids, because all of her kids are grown now, are adults, but when she's at home with her grandkids, you see a lot of very positive interaction on what's being done, teaching, training, playing games, doing different things, and that interaction is great. How beneficial is that for the boys? Well, it's very beneficial
Mhm.
versus at a daycare with somebody who's getting paid to watch them that is not vested in their life. So now, so many men became okay with their wives being missing from the home, but complain when needs are not met. That's probably true too. Mary says, I was a stay-at-home mom till my kids were 9 years old, which would obviously have a positive impact. I grew up with a stay-at-home mom. Now my mom's a real estate agent. If you need to sell a property and you're here in Tulare County, make sure and call my mother. But she didn't actually. I'm the youngest child, so the youngest is the favorite. I'm the spoiled one. But she didn't get her real estate license and good until after I was married, and or right at the time I was getting married. So I don't remember the exact year it was, but while we were kids, she was so I always had. I wasn't a latchkey kid. When I came home from work or from school, which was work and very hard to deal with at my young tender age, I knew that I would walk into the house and mom would be there. There was no, I'm going to, be here by myself or anything like that. What has that done to the mindset of young people growing up? Tammy says, and I was trained to be a homemaker, except for the cooking part you didn't like. No, actually, Tammy's a very good cook. She just hates cooking and had to overcome the sadness of not being able to live that dream. And so, because we probably driven primarily, but well, she actually was a teacher before we got married. So she pursued, a career in and of herself, absent of me. So I can't take the full blame. And, but when we got married, she actually probably the majority of our lives until I got up into management finance, she always made more than me. It's like, well, I'll be the stay-at-home dad. You keep working, man. We got insurance and a retirement system, and because she was a teacher and everything like that. So, verse 19. But if the whole, am I on the right?
No.
Give me a second here.
You stopped.
Oh
at
man,
13.
no, I turned 2 pages. I stopped at. Let me go back
You
to.
had the Amplified 10 and 11 and 12, I believe.
Okay, let me do 10 again. Therefore, she should be subject to his authority and should have a covering on her head as a token or a symbol of her submission to authority, that she may show reverence as the angels and not displease them. So now we come back to show reverence. Well, again, it might just be a cultural statement. I don't think showing reverence is a matter of whether you've got something covering your head. So now Tammy wears a cap. She does the little ponytail thing out the back, a cap. I mean, she doesn't look like a guy when she does that. She'll get her glasses on or wear her sunglasses, and be, sporting the cool look, on a relaxed day. When I see that, I don't see that as unsubmissive or or disrespectful to me. But now a lot of that has to come from a cultural statement because we don't view things like that. Whereas maybe in another country, if some woman walked into the house and she didn't have something on her head, the husband might view that. But again, the view is from a cultural standpoint, isn't it? How we've been trained. Nevertheless, in the plan of the Lord and from his point of view, woman is not apart from and independent of man, nor is man aloof from and independent of a woman. Now, what does the word aloof mean? Aloof. Neither woman without the man. Well, in the King James, it says, neither the woman without the man in the Lord. Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, and neither the woman without the man. So it really comes down to more like, in my interpretation, that's why I wish we could just skip this chapter. Be honorable. If honor's in you, honor will come out. There's probably some cultural elements that is going to show honor and show disrespect. How we talk to people in authority. You get pulled over by a police officer, a lot of people get mouthy.
Yeah. It's conspicuously uninvolved or uninterested, typically through distaste.
Okay, so typically you're uninterested. It wasn't the word typically. What did you say?
Uninvolved or uninterested, typically through distaste.
Okay, so uninvolved or uninterested. Well, how much is the woman involved in making decisions that would be honorable to her husband? How much is the man involved in making decisions that would be honorable to God, to Christ? See, we're more interested in what we want to do.
It's a narcissistic life.
Okay. For as woman was made from man, even so man is also born of woman. And all, whether male or female, go forth from God as their author. King James, for as the woman is of the man, even so is the man also by the woman, but all things of God. So where is God in the equation? Well, let's bring it back to the church. I remember one time I was ministering, leading into a prayer, coming in. I wanted to pray for people, and I was purposely moving the service in a certain direction, and a person raises their hand saying, hey, let's not forget that it's so-and-so birthday. I mean, just killed the whole moment. Okay, well, that was dishonorable in a couple of ways. And it's my example, but I'm not really referring to me, but it was dishonorable to the speaker. When somebody is in a position of leading authority, to interrupt a speaker when they're speaking is dishonorable. If honor is in you, honor will come out of you. If a woman realizes that she is to be honorable to her husband, that is going to dictate how she behaves herself in public. So if a man is talking and the woman is saying, does she interrupt him? That would be dishonorable, because interrupting is dishonorable in our culture on any level. What about correcting? If she corrected her husband in public or around somebody else, that would be dishonorable.
Can I ask you a question? Thinking about it. From the natural perspective, a man teaches his daughter these things just naturally. So when she does, at that point, a place that she gives her life to God, it is an easy transition to understand.
Yeah, but I think I would explain it in the biblical model of the home. The mother governs the home and sets it up. She would be the one teaching the children how to be respectful, how to be honorable, and by her example, they would learn, while also by the instruction. Now the man should be part of it, but the man is going out, killing a deer bringing it home for meat, bringing home the paycheck and everything like that. And so he has a place in it, but also by illustration, by lifestyle of a life that's honorable.
So the daughter, speaking about women, she understands based on the interaction then, listening to you, between the father and the mother whom she gets direction from.
Yeah. So you take the father and mother, they come home and talk, they're sitting there eating and they talk negatively about their pastor. How much honor, respect will the child have for somebody in ministry? Yes, we go there and we've submitted ourselves. We're here, we worship here and everything like that. And then we go talk smack about the church and or the pastor and or somebody else in leadership. So then somebody in leadership comes and gives a directive. It's like, who are you? I don't have to listen to you. My parents don't listen to you.
Yeah.
So a lot of, but the Bible says, train up a child in the way that they should go. When they're old, they'll not depart from it. A lot of parents allow their children to make decisions on whether they go to church or not, whether they do what the Bible says or whether they do what the world says. They don't. I've said it before that everything we do is a teaching moment, whether we realize it or not. We are showing by and I think Paul illustrated this, follow me as I follow Christ, is that I am going to live my life as an example for you. And so you can see how to live in this thing.
Okay.
So he wasn't out like many Christians are today. Well, I'm a follower of Christ. And they talk about but then they're disrespectful. They have no honor. They show up late to the things of God. They dismiss the things of God as not important. They put their own opinions above. So how do we worship God in this manner? Now it says, verse 13, judging yourself, is it comely that a woman pray unto God uncovered? Now this goes back to me more on cultural. Consider for yourself, is it proper and decent according to your customs? Now, the Amplified added in, according to your customs, for a woman to offer prayer to God publicly with her head uncovered. Well, okay, let's consider that. In the Western world, is that okay? Yeah, nobody's going to think twice about it.
No, I don't think so.
And she comes forward. She's going to pray to God. Her heart's right. I mean, I would think that's honorable. Now, could it be done dishonorably? Probably so. But it's based on the heart. Go ahead.
The honor of the uncovered head of the woman praying in this day and time also represents that she does honor her husband. Maybe he doesn't even go to church, but she's respectful. She makes sure everything is done at her home and done as far as she is. So she is.
That's a good point, because there's actually scripture on that a believing woman with an unbelieving spouse can save him through her conduct.
Yeah.
So if she will conduct herself godly,
She is covered.
she's covered, and it's going to have an effect on him.
And
So-
I'm saying that because in these times, we live in a Western culture. This is coming from the Middle East, or wherever with the Bible. But the Bible says that God is a present help. So right now, today, the word is still active, even though we're not in that time.
Yes,
Is what I'm.
but where we violate it, I think the majority of where we violate is I've got a right, husband and wife.
Yeah.
If we, painting with a very broad brush, how many women are really submitted to their husbands?
I got one.
But I said painting with a broad brush. We don't even think on that level
Yeah.
culturally. We're gonna get married, and it's on both sides. Man, how many men read this on they are the head of the woman and translate it to be domineering,
Yeah.
which the Bible's not talking about
Right.
that. And so we don't, by a lifestyle, we don't honor God because we do what is more culturally acceptable than what is biblically acceptable. And you just look at, man, woman, doesn't matter which one, but we put school and church or school and work before God. It ought not be. I mean, well, I can't because the school's requiring us to do this, and so we've got to be over there. Why don't you put God first? Well, it's just a Wednesday night service. Who cares? The service is about honoring God, coming together with the body of Christ, but we don't. And so now in our modern society, we don't just have a Monday through Friday work week that's from 8 to 5 or sun up, sundown. So now a lot of people get scheduled to work and they miss church. Okay, I get that. So what do I think God's opinion is of that? Where's our heart in it?
Yeah.
God, if I didn't have to work, I'd be in church. I need you to do something beyond because I've tried and it hasn't worked. And
or to let your boss or whoever's in authority over you at the job know, listen, Wednesday and Sunday, do not even look my way. Those are days that I have set aside to worship.
but now let's say you're saying that to your boss and he says, yeah, go find another job. Okay, you still got to be honorable to the boss.
Yeah.
And so then what do? I go to God. God, my boss, Peter over there, he just said, that I can't, that he's not going to accommodate. Remove him from his position or do something so that I can have it off. I need you to intervene. So I think it comes back to a heart issue. A lot of people get scheduled and, well, I'm scheduled, I can't go. And they're doing nothing about it. They're not interceding that God would make a way. So I think everything comes back to a heart issue. And if we really honored God, then we would seek, God in everything that we do. Does not the native, let me read out verse 13, I'm sorry. Judging yourself, I read that. Considering yourself, is it proper and decent according to your customs for a woman to offer prayer to God? Verse 14, does not the native sense of propriety, experience, common sense, reason itself teach you that for a man to wear long hair is a dishonor, humiliating, degrading to him? Does not even nature itself teach you that a man have long hair? Is it a shame unto him? But if a woman have long hair, it is glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. Okay, so let's bring it culturally. Is short hair on a woman a dishonorable thing? No, I just mentioned Latrice when she came in with her shaved hair. I thought she rocked it really well. And I didn't think, oh, wow, what a dishonorable person that she shaved her head because her head wasn't uncovered. And there are men hairstyle now that is longer. Now, I think the effeminate part, which we start violating the word of God, is something to be considered.
Well, I even remember back in the day when growing up, seeing men with long hair, it was kind of, considered kind of gayish.
Yeah, well, the effeminate element is the person doing it to endorse or enhance their femininity.
Yeah.
So let's take the African American culture, because your hair is pretty shaved down to your head. It's like what, maybe a 1/8 of an inch long, something like that. But remember the afro back in the 70s? When's it considered long and when's it considered effeminate? Well, I remember
when the afro itself was culturally.
It was culturally acceptable.
And then the men started to press their hair, which is to lay it down like the women wore their hair. I don't know if you remember.
I don't remember that. 60s, but I don't. I remember when. Can you remember Mod Squad, that TV? And is that what his name was? And he had the really big afro. Yeah. But you never looked at somebody with a long hair afro as it being effeminate. It was a hairstyle. It was a cultural thing that it worked. Okay, now the thing you're talking about, they're going to that was going, if it was going toward the effeminate side, now we might have a biblical issue with it. But what about Samson? Samson had a Nazirite custom, and no razor was supposed to come to his head. Now, in doing that, that was not considered to be effeminate.
Right.
that was a obviously a hairstyle that people understood what it was. So that's a good point. That goes all the way back into the Old Testament, where things were a lot more strict than they are now. And also Samson, remember,
Mhm.
there was no razor that came to his head. So, by the time he was an old man, he had long hair. But what's that?
Oh, no, sorry.
So I think it comes back into the intent of the heart.
Yeah.
And those things becoming cultural. Now, if anyone is disposed to be argumentative and contentious about this, we hold to and recognize no other custom in worship than this, nor do the churches of God generally. Verse 16, but if any man seem to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God. What is that? If anyone is disposed to be argumentative and contentious about this, or I wonder if that means that if anyone tries to create rules and regulations to say you have to do it this way, we hold to and recognize no other custom in worship than this, nor do the churches of God generally. But in what I instruct you next, I do not commend you, because when you meet together, it is not for the better, but for the worse. 17, you got to love Paul's wording here.
Yeah.
Now, in this that I declare unto you, I praise you not, that you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when you come together in church, I hear that there be divisions among you, and I partly agree. So I wonder if, in verse 18, but in the first place, when you assemble as a congregation, I hear that there are cliques, divisions, and factions among you, and I in part believe it. Cliquing is very big in churches. People like to hang around with people that they know, and they like to separate themselves. What is the basis of separation? We disagree on something, the differences. And so we shouldn't be that way. There should be no divisions among the church. 19, for there must be also heresies among you, that they which are approved may be made manifest among you. Oh my goodness, my hour is over. I wanted to get out of this chapter.
Wow. It did go back.
For doubtless there have to be factions and parties among you, in order that they who are genuine and of approved fitness may become evident and plainly recognized among you. So again, we go back, we'll pick up on verse 20 next week. My goodness, that hour went by fast. And okay. So again, I come back even on verse 19, is who are genuine and of approved fitness. If there is honor in our heart, honor will come out. That actually says a lot. We should be driven and do things by honor. Because a lot of the word of God is based on honor, honoring God's word, honoring God. We don't honor God. We handle God. We want God to intervene in our life, but we don't understand how holy he is, how pure he is, how righteous he is. And we think, and a lot of it comes from the perverted doctrine of love and grace, that God just accepts us as we are. Now, true statement, God does accept us as we are. But how close you're going to get to him is going to be by how much you get you out of the way, get me out of the way. And so we thank everybody for being with us today. If you live near Visalia, come join and make yourself a part of Covenant Peace International West Coast, where we're empowering families, transforming communities, and equipping people with God's hope. We've got to walk in God, especially as these days get darker. He is light, and when we're in the light, no darkness has any power over us. So we have to learn how to put these things into effect in our life. We've got to realign for this time. We should be in alignment with God, walking in God in all ways, submitting to God in his word, which means that our life has to submit to honor and being honorable to those that are in authority in our life. Whether we take what Paul says here, that the man is the covering for the woman and Christ is the covering for the man, each has to walk in the honor of their covering, but also in governments. Also in, you get pulled over by a police officer, let your light shine. Shut your mouth up on what you think. And, you may be right, but if you're dishonorable, you're wrong. And so you have to learn how to walk in it. Call you blessed. We'll see you tomorrow night at church at 7 o'clock, and then we'll be back on our live stream on Friday.